Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today, How to Measure Impact for Your Nonprofit. We're so pleased you could be with us, and we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. A few housekeeping announcements. The first is that we are recording this presentation, and we'll circulate that recording to you following the webinar today. I'd encourage you to review it on your own time and share with your colleagues as well. Secondly, there will be time for question and answer at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, you can just raise your hand and then I will give you the ability to speak to our special guests today and ask your question of them. So with that, we're going to do some brief introductions. My name's Maureen Coleman. I'm the Director of Marketing at UpMetrics. Thanks again for being here. And I'm very pleased to introduce Stephen Minix, our Director of K-12 Solutions, who's going to provide you with his background and also introduce our very special featured guest, Jennifer Rizzo. So Stephen, let me give you the remote and take it away.
Good morning, folks. Thank you, Mo. As Mo said, my name is Stephen Minix. I've worked in education for the last 15 plus years as a coach, athletic director, district athletic director, coordinator of after school programs, etc. I have a unique perspective on this space. I took an $8 million loss in one grant cycle when I was running after school programs and athletics for a school district. The reason we lost out was simple. We didn't have a data strategy. I use that now to fuel kind of this approach at supporting other organizations, be able to collect, aggregate, and synthesize and communicate out the impact of their community-based programs. So when we get to the Q&A portion, please ask probing questions. This is a passion project for me, and it's fun to partner with organizations in this space. At UpMetrics, we have a simple theory of change. We believe that participation in high-quality, interest-based activities leads to positive outcomes that can drive systematic change. Collectively, everyone here on this webinar believes that providing this level of programming and these types of programs leads to positive outcomes in communities we work with. Some of these include academic progress, health improvements, mental health, and financial advances. Those are just a couple of the options, but we realize that to get to that, there's a lot of challenges for organizations, because to be able to dive into those specific buckets, you need data. To get that data is usually pretty difficult. Oftentimes, the technology is not purpose-built for the staff or directors. It's more built for the administrators, thus creating an issue of buy-in, which is the third bullet. Complicated flows to access and navigate outcome data, whether you're pulling it from large software systems like Salesforce or from school districts, and what to pull. The cost. Usually nonprofits run pretty lean, so their departments don't have a bunch of bandwidth. The intellectual capital to run the tech. Do you have the brain power in the room at the ground level at all pieces of the chain to be able to execute the data approach you're trying to attack? And the last, which is probably very common to a lot of organizations, is complacency. It's not broken, we don't fix it. The idea of institutional inertia. And I often rebut that with, you don't have to be sick to get better. But without program infrastructure and actionable data, the funding will continue to dry up and the opportunity gap will continue to widen. Reference back to my comment earlier about taking an $8 million loss. So as we start to talk about how we approach measuring impact, it's best to understand the challenges in mind. We've developed this approach to support organizations as they work to measure true impact of their programs. First, we must have a basic understanding of participation and dosage. Second, once we have this information, we can start to talk about how access to these programs leads to greater impact. For example, some organizations have attendance thresholds that talk about kids that have come to 2/3 of the program or more, and then they show the outcome for those kids versus kids that didn't come nearly as much. Being able to parse that information out is actually very valuable over time. Starting with participation and dosage. It's the first and most basic step. We must understand who we are serving and how often. This includes demographic information as well as gender, race, ethnicity, potentially free and reduced lunch status, EL rates, etc. That kind of information, if we understand who we're serving and what they're doing, how often they're there, gives us a very, very powerful data set to begin our journey with. When measuring participation and dosage, there's a bunch of different approaches that you can approach or you can attack it with. Some organizations have pen and paper registration. Some have registration software. Some have technology that's purpose-built. Very few in that space do. But there's starting to become a proliferation of other options, whether us at UpActive and UpMetrics, Tableau, and some other resources. The point is, the sooner you get this information into a tool and digitize, you can begin to leverage that in your pursuits. On the right here, you'll see just a simple graph outlining the breakdown of the race and ethnicity of the participants. That level of information seems very surface level, but it does provide some very valuable data points. Our solution specifically at UpMetrics, we built UpActive to specifically allow the frontline staff a tool that works for them. The beauty of it is, by working for them, it helps them manage participation, track attendance, communicate, all the things that they need to do in the role. That helps with buy-in because it's aggregating the data that rolls into UpMetrics, the actual data visualization side, where administrators can now synthesize trends, attendance trends, tardies, gender rates, breakdowns, giving you the purview to understand attendance in line with your goals as an organization. But there are other ones out there, of course. So when we talk about measuring the impact, now that we have an understanding of who we're serving and how often we're serving, we can now talk about the outcomes. Today we'll focus on two of these specifically: SEL, social emotional learning, and academic performance. These are two that we're going to look at today. There's a million you can, but we'll start here. Social emotional learning, very much the hot topic right now in kind of out of school time activity and in education for that matter. Why is that the case? It's because funders are funding programs that do that, that have that as a staple of their program. Now, we know that our programs provide positive benefits when it comes to social emotional learning, but to start to measure this impact, consider the overall goal of your program. How is your program intentionally impacting social emotional learning for students? And then setting benchmarks in these areas to work backwards into to determine the outcome. Many organizations leverage pre and post surveys, but they often stop there. By taking that information and layering it over your participation and your dosage, you now can begin the journey of correlating this information. And that's the key, being able to understand what needs to happen to get the most impact in your program for kids. So as this kind of vertical begins to solidify across out of school time and nonprofit, there's starting to be some best practices authored in this space. Also, you can leverage industry experts that are actually doing this work. For example, Algorithm, Up to Us with their healthy attributes survey stuff that they have specific for sports-based youth development. The idea is the information needs to be purposeful. Don't just take off the rack survey and expect it to give you the outcomes or the analysis you're looking for in your program. If it's a sport-based program, you might want to examine sport-based youth development surveys. Regardless, the idea is taking this information, being able to analyze it, synthesize it, and layering it over participation and dosage. Very valuable starting point. The second outcome we were talking about today is academic performance. We understand that involvement in extracurricular activities leads to higher academic outcomes. There's a lot of data that brings this out. But why does this relationship exist? Obviously, ownership and choice is a big part of motivating kids for success. Oftentimes, there's thresholds, attendance GPAs, a requirement, etc. Whatever the reason, there is a relationship. And so analyzing that and understanding it is important. Type of academic outcomes we tend to look at: grade point average, standardized test, SAT, PSAT, average daily attendance, classes passed, and behavior infractions. It can take on a lot of different feel, EL growth rates. It just depends on what's going to be important for your program to understand. Some major things to think about when deciding what academic data to look at is what can you get access to? What would you want to get access to? This right here on the right-hand side is one small table from a large client of ours in New York, where they wanted to understand the impact of their program versus non-participating kids across the city of New York, looking at growth in ELA rates. The other part of the study is math. This sheet only shows ELA. The point is, because of the relationship we've authored with large data systems and Department of Education in New York, we're able to support them in this effort. Not everybody's going to have that access, but you do have relationships with the schools you work at, the programs, the communities that you're in, and trying to develop this idea of an ecosystem of data. Who has access to what can we use to be able to round out our story? That's difficult, but there's folks like us out there that are trying to help in this space. Some other ways to measure impact: heat maps, ROI, looking at the return on investment, looking at family surveys, fitness grant assessments. The possibilities are truly endless, but regardless, should be intentional to what you're looking at to avoid mission drift. Oftentimes, nonprofits will chase the dollar as opposed to stay true to their goals. And based on what funding comes in, they'll drift to accommodate that. But with an effective data strategy, you can limit that and thus be more precise in what you're trying to offer. Now, the goal of this, and the reason why most of you are here, is not to listen to me. It's actually to dive in with a true person doing this work in the space. Ginny Rizzo, who I've known for years, is the program director for J.K. Livin, Matthew McConaughey's foundation. And Ginny, I'm happy to pass the mic to you as you really understand this work, and I think folks will really benefit hearing from you.
Thank you, Stephen and Maureen, for inviting me to join you all for this forum today. Hello, everyone. I'm looking forward to sharing information with all of you. A quick background of the Just Keep Living Foundation. It was started 10 years ago by Matthew and Camilla McConaughey. And basically, we run after-school fitness and wellness programs. We have 4 key components to our programming: fitness, community service, nutrition, and gratitude. Our target demographic is Title I high schools. Currently, we're running 32 programs in 7 cities, 6 states. And 83% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. And when you look at the overall average, 68% of the students we serve are Hispanic and 26% are African American. Next slide, please. When we look to the approach to impact, access to data is crucial for reporting back to your sponsors, our board members, and the schools that we serve. But for us, more importantly, it's to measure the impact and success of our programs. When you look at social and emotional learning, it's often hard to gauge these intangibles. So what we do as an organization is we pass out beginning of the year and end of the year surveys, really focusing on improving the impact we've had on their self-esteem, self-confidence, and our students' ability to deal with stress. With our approach to academic performance, we have a few key performance indicators. We specifically look at GPA, attendance, retention, and graduation. Another key component of our programming is gratitude. Matthew is big on this. All of our programming ends with our students in a gratitude circle. And the point of this is really changing our students' mindset, their approach to the obstacles that they face in their lives, and having a positive outlook on life. And so as we focus on teaching life skills and those soft skills to where we want to ensure that they're leading successful lives and reaching their full potential. Next slide, please. Through working with UpMetrics, here you'll see a partner profile with just 2 of the Los Angeles schools that we currently run programming in, Onimo Inglewood and Onimo South Los Angeles. This is a snapshot from our 2017-2018 school year. And as you can see, it gives us an overview of the total participants in the Just Keep Living program, as well as the demographics for both sites and the average for those students participating in our program who qualify for free and reduced lunch. Next slide, please. Again, it provides us with a school profile, the total enrollment, the demographic of the student body, which is really important for us when we're reporting back to our funders. Again, and an average on campuses of those students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. In our schools in Washington, D.C., we'll see those averages at 99 and 100%. Next slide. This is really something that has been crucial for us with our partnership with UpMetrics. We are able to actually track the hours that our students are participating in events. So we're able to break down the total number of participants and how it relates to the total number of hours. And specifically, we can break it down to total number of hours that they're physically participating in activities that correlates with our fitness component, how many hours they're spending on community service projects, field trips, etc. So this has been very valuable information for us. Next slide, please. Here, it looks at gender and total participation. And in today's society, as we look at society really focusing on the shift of empowering young women, we can look at the gender breakdown. We look at the total number of non-JKL participants in each of the schools, and then it allows us to see how many girls are participating in our program versus boys. And really this allows us to see if there's a balance, and if not, what we can do to recruit either more female or male participants. Next slide. Here again, as Stephen kind of mentioned before, it gives us the demographics of the school. And here we're looking at the non-Just Keep Living or Just Keep Living participants, the ethnic breakdown for each subgroup. Next slide, please. And then here we can see, if we could go back one, please.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Here, it allows us to see specifically which groups that we seem to be recruiting in our programs. Again, this is valuable information when we go out to sponsors, and really looking at the overall demographics as our doors are open to everyone, and we want to make sure that we have equal representation of all ethnic groups at each of the school sites participating in our programming. Next slide, please. Here you see a gender analysis based off grade point average by school site. So here we can compare the average GPA of a Just Keep Living student compared to a non-Just Keep Living student at both school sites. And you'll see on average at both school sites, females have a higher GPA than their male counterparts. And this kind of allows us really to look at our design and what supports can we put in place to help our male students increase their GPA. And so that may be connecting them to school resources. So this is valuable information as well. Next slide, please. Here again is the gender analysis with the average daily attendance. And look, we all know if kids are in their seats, that equates to higher GPAs. And when we're reporting back to schools, they love to hear this because the more kids are in school, obviously the school will receive more funding. And if you look on average, both female and males who participate in our Just Keep Living programs are in school much higher than their counterparts. And if you look at the average ADA for females, you know, you're looking at almost 97%. But in both subgroups, we're pushing at least almost 95% or higher, which are the averages that these schools shoot for. So this is really powerful information that we can share with the schools that we're currently working with. Next slide, please. Here is a GPA in relation to JKL program attendance. And look, we're not trying to be smarter than anyone else here. We love to be able to analyze the data and from that evaluate our programs and see what is working and if we need to make adjustments. But as you see by this graph, students that attend more JKL events do have a higher GPA on average. Next slide, please. Here we're looking at GPA in relation to Just Keep Living program attendance. And as Stephen mentioned earlier, attendance threshold is really crucial when you're analyzing your data. So for here, Just Keep Living participants that attended over 66% of our events on average had a 0.79 higher GPA than those students in our program who attended less than 66% of our events. Next slide, please. And here we're looking at ethnicity breakdown on grade point average. And keep in mind, our doors are open to everyone. We tend to hit those students who may not have made the grades to join a sports team. And so here, when we look at grade point average of, once again, the Just Keep Living participants compared to the non-JKL kids, our students are scoring a much higher GPA. And I'll let you guys take a look at that graph. But for African Americans and Hispanics, they had an average GPA of 0.31 higher than those not participating in our programs. Next slide, please. Okay, here we're looking at the ethnicity analysis average daily attendance. Obviously, again, if kids are there more in school, they're going to learn more. And as a result, we're looking at an increase in the number of days and the percentages that the kids are in school. And as I mentioned earlier, these average ADAs, again, we can report back to the schools. The kids are learning more. The schools are making more money. And as we kind of look through our surveys, we've heard testimonials from our students saying, hey, we want to come to school when we know that there's Just Keep Living programming. And so that helps us, really report back to the schools as well. Next slide, please. We love hearing from our students directly. We often highlight testimonials from our students. This is one from Evelyn. She's a recent graduate of Onamos South Los Angeles. And she says, I am thankful for having teachers that always look out for all of their students, no matter the situation either of them are in. I'm also thankful for being part of a program that makes sure students in various areas are staying off the streets after school and teaching them how to live a better and healthier life. And really, this is why this program was started, to get the kids off the street, to provide a safe and nurturing environment where we could equip them to live healthier lives. And before we get into the next slides, where we're kind of focusing on those students that qualify for free and reduced lunch with the Title I funding, we also have been able to really focus that we've seen an increase in the number of special education students that we are serving, as well as an increase in the number of ELL students that we are serving. And so through UpMetrics, we're also able to kind of gauge and track some information with those subgroups as well. Next slide, please. Here we're looking at lunch status among the Just Keep Living participants. It breaks down showing the number of our students that qualify for free lunch compared to reduced lunch. Once again, which is key for when we report back to sponsors. Next slide, please. Here we're looking at the GPA and ADA based off that lunch status. The average GPA of a Just Keep Living participant. Again, it's very valuable information to compare that to the non-Just Keep Living students in both schools. And you can see the percentages of the students that we are serving compared to the non-JKL kiddos. And next slide, please. This slide right here is really interesting. It looks at our discipline infractions. And look, we're very aware of the students we're serving. As I've mentioned, we're looking and targeting those kids that didn't make the sports team for whatever reason, who may be getting into trouble after school, and trying to provide them a safe place to go to get them on the right track. And so if you look, interesting with this slide, the number of students receiving out-of-school suspensions as well as detentions for these two school sites are just keep living students averaged a little bit higher than their non-counterparts. And so this allows us as an organization to look at our programming and ask ourselves, what can we do to improve our program design so that we're seeing an increase in positive behavior and a decrease in those referrals as well as out-of-school and in-school suspensions. Next slide. And here is an executive summary of the two school sites that we just kind of gave you an overview on. And this is a takeaway that I know Stephen and Mo are going to share with all of you today at the conclusion of this webinar.
Thanks, Jenny. Really, really interesting stuff. And I'm excited to open this up to anyone who has any questions. I'll give people a second to raise their hands and ask any questions that they have of Jenny. As a reminder, I will allow you to speak once you've raised your hand. And while we're giving people a chance to raise their hands, I want to ask a quick question of Jenny. Can you talk a little bit more about how you administer surveys to your program participants?
Yes. So when the students sign up for a program in the beginning of every school year, we do pass out a beginning of the year survey to our students, and we're really assessing where their fitness levels are at prior to starting the program. We're looking at some nutritional aspects, the amount of water they're drinking, the amount of fast food that they're consuming, but also, as I mentioned, those soft skills, where they are in terms of their self-confidence and self-esteem, so that we can track those areas again at the end of programming to see where we've made the greatest strides. And then we can reassess our program design based off our results at the end of each school year. But one thing I really want to stress here is when you're passing out surveys to young people, especially high school students, it's really important the people who are administering these surveys, how they are presenting this information in the surveys and their wording is very crucial because we don't want whoever's passing these surveys out to influence the students and how they answer the surveys.
Great, thanks, Jenny. I saw a hand go up and then it went back down. So if there are any questions, I know both Stephen and Jenny would love to answer. Again, while I'm giving people a chance to raise their hands, you should be able to find that button in your control panel on the Zoom webinar. But in the interim, I want to let you all know that we'll be circulating, as I said, the recording as well as the impact report executive summary that Jenny referenced following the webinar. So we have a couple of questions. Greta, I'm going to give you the mic.
Great. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So my name's Greta Oshbacher. I'm the Director of Programs at the Fit Kids Foundation. And we work with young kids. So most often the kids in our after-school physical activity programs are between the ages of like kindergarten and second grade. But we also work with up to 5th, 6th, even some 8th graders. However, for those very young kids, we've been wanting to track social emotional learning, but it's hard to survey the kids and have them respond to the questions for the reasons that were just kind of highlighted. They're pretty influential and they hear what their friend said right before them and they say the same thing. So I'm wondering if you guys have suggestions or thoughts about how to track SEL with our youngest kids.
Yes, and thanks for the question. I mean, industry standards talk oftentimes about how the SEL work is a little bit, it's very new, but it's almost untapped in the ages below 3rd grade. However, one of the partners that we highlighted earlier, Up to Us, has their healthy attributes. I forget what the exact acronym is, but we can follow up after this. But a lot of the assessment is done with pictures, smiley faces, frowny faces, things like that. And although they on the periphery they seem a little bit kind of touchy-feely, that's where you need to be at when you're talking about a kindergarten age or 1st grade child. But back to what Ginny was saying about making sure the folks that are administering the surveys understand the audience and how to approach them, that's important. But I would definitely advise you to look into Up to Us's survey, and you could definitely ping us and we can provide access as well.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Thanks, Greta. And Terry, I'm going to give you the mic now. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you for sharing this presentation. The information was phenomenal. My question really goes even further. We are being challenged with our supporters, grantees, foundations that we're working with, of how do we measure parental or legal guardians engagement? How are we getting them to be involved? We're measuring the impact we're having with our programs with the youth that we're involved. And, you know, like you're saying, through surveys and doing assessments, we're able to do that. But now we're being challenged of how do you make sure that the parents are engaged and they're also seeing the benefit? You're telling the story and you're sharing with them. So do you have any best practices or suggestions? How do we do that? You know, because at the end of the day, you know, we want to have that impact with the youth and the program that we offer, but we also want to make sure that the parents become champions or advocates. How do we make sure that we're getting the information that they see that in their children and they're able to tell the story for us? Any suggestions?
Yeah, and Jenny, jump in whenever you feel fit. What I would suggest is, what are your touch points? What I would start with, if I was sitting in front of you, would be, what are your touch points with parents? How often are you engaging them? Is it parent meeting at the beginning of the year? Is there check-ins? Is there updates? Do you do any kind of dosing with newsletters? Because there's ways that you can kind of aggregate all your touch points with parents, whether it be in person, whether it be a newsletter, whether it be an event scheduled for parents. And start looking at the participation in those, just like you look at the participation in with kids. You have 10 events scheduled for kids. They show up to 9 out of 10. You look at the participation and dosage. You can get to similar analysis with parents. But it would start with kind of, what are you already doing? Now, as well as stakeholder feedback. I know that I am pinged oftentimes. This is a different hat. I'm wearing my parent hat now. The extended daycare that my child goes to at her school, they oftentimes ask us for stakeholder feedback, and always giving us 3-question surveys throughout the year that are used to inform parent feedback. So happy to dig in on that with you, and I can point you in some nice directions as well, if that doesn't answer your question, Terry.
It does. Thank you so much.
And if I'm here, Stephen, a few suggestions that I have, because, you know, we've looked at this issue as well, and really visibility, and as Stephen mentioned, encouraging that parent engagement. And again, whether that's, we oftentimes will go to back to school nights, and we have back to school night, a representative there from the program. Oftentimes it's our instructors that are running the program with a PowerPoint informing parents. We've gone to a coffee with the principal where they invite parents in and we give a short presentation, and then encouraging those parents that sign up for a program to join us in our activities. Our doors are open for workouts. We constantly are communicating to join for community service events or field trips. And one thing that we've utilized since joining and partnering with UpMetrics is there is a portion of the app where we can directly communicate with those parents via email. And so as much visibility and communication and encouraging that engagement, I think will help as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's great information.
Thanks, Terry. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We are over the 11:30 mark, so I think we're going to conclude here today, but I want to thank everyone for joining. As a reminder, we'll circulate the recording as well as the JK Livin Impact Report. Most importantly, I want to thank Jenny for taking time to be with us and share this sort of wealth of knowledge and her expertise. We're at UpMetrics, we're really trying to create a community where we can all learn with and from each other. And so thanks to Jenny for sort of leading the charge there and sharing the JK Livin story. And thanks to you as well, Stephen. So have a great day, everyone. Take care, and we'll hope to see you at a future webinar.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mo. Have a nice one.